right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us on episode 128 of Blowback, Exposing Imperial Decline. I've got my regular co-host, Ian Cummer, from a suburb in Moscow. And I've got Dr. Anthony Monteiro from Philadelphia and Patrick Corbett from Vancouver. Is that correct, Patrick? Is it
That's
Vancouver?
correct.
All right. Thank you two very much for joining us. I entitled our program today, An All-Humanity Movement for Peace and Democracy. And that title came to me, while I was watching Dr. Monteiro's Saturday Free School last Saturday. And, it was a good topic that they entertained for a good hour or so. And I wanted to talk more about that. Also, we're just going to talk about the possibilities that the American people can be a geostrategic force for peace and democracy as well. And what are the chances that this brainwashed, confused, ignorant people can be a positive force, maybe, I think that would be a big change, because I don't think, recently we've seen, the American people being a very positive force on the global stage. They're kind of disenfranchised, kind of, what they want doesn't matter. And they kind of let the ruling class do whatever they want. But Tony, how can that change? How can we get the American people on board and usher them into a positive direction?
Yeah, well, thank you. It's good to be with you, Billy, and Ian and Patrick. Well, I have to say out of the gate that I don't quite agree with your assessment of the American people.
I was being mean. I was being harsh.
Oh, okay. But that's okay. I mean, I think most people, or many people, would agree with your assessment of the American people. They seem not to have taken any independent stances for some time. However, I think back to the period of the Vietnam War and the role that the anti-war movement played in that. And then I looked at the landscape, the political landscape of the United States, and especially the 10 months of the past presidential election, literally from about February 2024 to November. And, I think we'd have to say, objectively looking at the circumstances, that the political geography of the United States is defined, I think should be defined, as a political warfare, political conflict that looks almost like a pre-Civil War situation. And unless we understand it as such, we can easily conclude that the American people in November 5th, 2024, voted against their class interest and voted for an authoritarian, almost neo-fascist person in Donald Trump. However, to take that position, as far as I'm concerned, is to give in to the ideological and propaganda position of the dominant sections of the American ruling class, who are pretty much in the Democratic Party. And to understand the Democratic Party is very crucial to understanding what the American people did on November 5th. I would even say achieved on November 5th. The Democratic Party, first of all, is not the party of Franklin Roosevelt. It is not the party of Lyndon B. Johnson. It is the party of the neo the war makers, the globalists, the identity politicians people, those who have all, and identity politics is premised upon the idea that most Americans are backward and so on. What we saw, however, was the majority of working people united in ways politically that we have not seen them for many, many decades. The majority of working people either voted against Kamala Harris and by implication Biden, or did not vote at all. The people, let us say, of Philadelphia, especially the Black working class and poor, and the working people of Butler, Pennsylvania, overwhelmingly white, while not knowing each other personally, knew each other through common circumstance, and their political behavior tended to be the same. You know, for this reason, and if I'm talking too much, you can stop me at any point, Billy. For this reason, it is obvious that every aspect of the ideological and political life of the nation have been weaponized against the people and to support the richest, wealthiest, most powerful classes and political forces in the country. When we talk about weaponization, the weaponization of knowledge, the weaponization of science, the weaponization of the internet, the weaponization of AI, the weaponization of pop culture, the weaponization of everything that has to do with the nation. And when we talk about weaponization, we're talking at the end of the day about the ideological struggle. And by ideological struggle, I think you've heard me say this before, Billy, we're not talking about the minutia or details of Marxism or Leninism and what side of those questions one is on. We're talking about the broad question of where the majority of American working people and poor stand with regards to that political party. Here I'm talking about the Democratic Party, and that class that is responsible for every war that we've experienced over the last 30, 35 years. We're talking about that class that is responsible for the economic policies which have expanded the number of billionaires while throwing more and more American people into poverty. In fact, to say working class is almost synonymous with saying poverty. So when you look at all of these factors, and then you look at polling data where 70% of the American people in a reliable poll, a New York Times poll, and others, Pew poll and other polls, have shown that 70% of the American people say that the political and economic systems either have to be fundamentally reformed. 15% of those say that the economic and political systems have to be torn down and something new built in their place. I think that is reliable data, and it has been repeated in poll after poll. 80% of the people say the American government does not represent them. Then you get observations by key players in from the ruling elite, like Richard Haas, who was the head of the Council on Foreign Relations, the premier ruling class think tank on international relations. As he was retiring in 2023, he said that the greatest threat to America's security, and I use his language, I don't agree with that idea of what he thinks American security is not China, Russia, Iran, or North Korea, but the American people. He said this in an interview in December 2023 as he was retiring from his position. You put all of this together, the assessment of key players in the ruling class, their weaponization against working people and lower middle class people and the poor to distract them, be it, quote, pop culture, be it, quote, hip hop culture, be it Hollywood, the uses of the internet as a weapon against the people, professional sports to distract the people, to pacify the people. And then you saw what happened on November 5th. It's not a matter of what you think about Donald Trump. It's the fact that the Democratic Party and the Biden-Harris administration had brought us and the world closer to world war than we had been in 80 years. No administration had so inflamed the world situation as had the Biden-Harris administration. For the American people to do what they did in spite of everything on November 5th showed to me that, one, they reject, as the polls had shown, the direction of the country, that they, be it Gaza or be it Ukraine, and these were both factors in how people voted. The majority of voters were against what was happening in Gaza. The majority of voters were against what was going on in Ukraine. But they were also against the policies that led to inflation. They were also against an open borders policy, which would have further degraded the standard of living of working people. And then, of course, although I don't know that this was polled, they were looking at the fact that artificial intelligence and robots would leave another 40% of the existing workforce unemployed in a decade. I am of the opinion, and the way I view the landscape, the political landscape of the country, that it must be seen as a site of intense conflict, and even to define it as a kind of war situation, a political conflict so intense in this country that it looks like something equivalent to warfare. And this polling data, and a lot of people say, well, polls don't tell us anything. Polls don't tell us everything, but they tell us something, especially when the surveys are done over and over and over again and the same outcome results. 80% of the people say the country is moving in the wrong direction. Some polls showed that Vladimir Putin, among Republicans and independents, does better than Joe Biden. This was back in last year. I mean, this is unbelievable, and we have to make a proper assessment of it.
Yeah, I don't think anybody here disagrees with the obvious that the American people were sick to death of the status quo, and definitely Biden, Kamala Harris represented that status quo establishment. And that has always been what made Trump popular, was his being able to depict himself as an anti-establishmentarian. And as far as he was able to do that, he was very popular. The concern is that that's a selling, that's a sales tactic, right? That's my concern, that Trump is in selling himself like that, but he's really not. And I mean, we're gonna find out. He did take some legitimate political heat to be principled against the anti-Russia, the anti-Russian attack that the establishment was pushing. he took a lot of heat, and he kept saying, "Hey, wouldn't it be great if we were friends with Russia?" I'm good for, I respect Putin. Like saying things like that, he took heat for, and he was principled. But how is that going to be able to, manifest itself in these next 4 years is definitely a big question. But guys, Ian, Patrick, what are your thoughts?
Billy, let me just clarify one thing. I'm not talking essentially about Trump. I'm talking about the American people.
Okay.
The data that I present is the American people. See, I think there are a lot of commentators and podcasters who perhaps they're not aware of it, by not talking about the American people, are acting like the American people don't count. I am saying the American people, and this is above and beyond Trump, and they can do, just like they made Trump, they can unmake Trump. He can be undone. Yeah. If, for example, take the question of war and peace. The majority of American people are war exhausted. If he wants to be a war president, he is thereby going against the people that put him in the presidency. He could be a passing footnote in history if he goes against this outrage, this anger, this desire for real change among the American people. All of this makes of them a force at this time that is a geostrategic force. They are not this passive, unaware, backward, racist, homophobic, misogynist mass. In fact, I would argue the American people are way ahead of the working people and the masses of most developed capitalist countries, or by the way, all of them. If you take the British people, if you take the Germans or the French, the American masses, in particular, the American working people, are way in advance of them. I say all of this to say that if we wish to go forward, if we who claim the mantle of radical change, of the struggle for democracy and peace and all of that, we have to have a correct assessment of our people, the people that we could best influence. We're not going to be able to influence the Russians, the Russian people, the Germans, but we can say something about our own people who I believe are today in the center of a vast change or transformation in the configuration of world forces.
I want to get Patrick's take on this because
put me on the spot.
Yes, on the spot.
Well, I'm hopeful with what Tony is saying, and I listened to the interview with Garland Nixon, and I was ticking off the points, and they were persuasive. But I also am concerned as to there may be a massive discontent with the situation the way it is, but I worry that some of it is tending towards wanting a kind of fascist solution as opposed to a democratic solution. And on the point of America being in the lead, I don't know enough about the internal politics of other countries, but I do know that at one point in the very near past, the French were, with their Yellow Vest movement, were far ahead of anything that I was seeing in Canada, or being. I'm Canadian American, so I'm a hybrid.
I've lived going to be an American very soon, Patrick.
Well, yes, very soon. It's going to be the 51st state.
I can hardly wait. Then I can wave too.
Well, it would just be funny. I almost wish Canada
No,
joins.
I think I think we're going to see. Obviously, if Trump follows through on some of the things that make us hopeful, like the posting that interview with Sachs, that was actually took me aback. I agree. How could he post that without meaning it to be taken seriously by a lot of people? So I think we're in a wait and see, and we're going to see if there's pushback on some of the things. We're going to see if he follows through on Ukraine, and I'm particularly interested to see if he's got a strategy for stopping the genocide in Gaza. So, that's my take, which is, pretty indecisive in some ways, but I'm hopeful that we're on a more progressive
Trajectory.
That's the word.
So what happens is we keep on trying to take it back to Trump, and Tony's wanting us to talk about the American people. Ian, you got some thoughts on the American people?
So you brought up something, but you mentioned the Yellow Vest movement in France. And I would say, if anything, the two-party system for all of the problems, I would say, is almost vindicated by the state of Europe right now. I mean, it seems like every Western European country has a government with an approval rating below the age of consent, almost not an exaggeration, like in the teens. I mean, I can't believe that. It's like the 23%. I mean, it's amazing. It's like, how did these guys even get into power? But it's because they build these coalitions. So there's generally some populist party that can get a lot of votes, but they get every other party to tag team against, whether it's the AfD party in Germany or whoever. I forget what's Le Pen's party in France. But basically, they really stack the decks to prevent those parties from getting any seats in their parliament, from getting their guy the presidency. And what's interesting, I mean, because Biden had a low approval rating, but his party did not win. So, I mean, I think we were talking about this in the last show where we had Anthony on, but if Kamala Harris had won, that would have meant the end of the American political system. It would just mean they could put any candidate, didn't matter who, they could put a cardboard cutout. They just say, here's this completely fake person. I mean, I think that was really the most fake presidential candidate in history, even including the people who didn't win in previous elections in American history. I mean, it's just like you have Kamala Harris, who's a fake politician, a fake leader who is already in power, but pretending to not be in power. It's like, please vote for me and I'll do these things. Like, she couldn't already do those things. Then you had Tim Walz, who I think was even worse than her. He was just his record he was a fake. He was checking the boxes. And if those people had won, that would have just meant the system was a joke. But people voted.
The system is a joke in a sense, because you have to know that the people behind the scenes that are pulling the levers knew that she wasn't a viable candidate in any way. So why didn't they parachute somebody else in? I mean, I'm suspicious about that. It almost seems like they're saying, okay, let's see what we can make out of Trump. In the sense that if he doesn't do what they want him to do, then they can they can pull some stunts that they can blame on him. I don't know.
Well,
I mean,
I'm of the opinion that there was an insurgency in the capitalist class itself. And I've said it on this show previously, but I'll say it again. I would say what happened is there was a split, and so I would say that split is between the lower half of the ownership class and the upper half of the ownership class, with the upper half being mostly located on the coastlines in those very, very white collar liberal areas like Silicon Valley and New England. And those people have a lot of money. They love the stock market. They love GDP growth, but those people are of the opinion that you can have an economy that doesn't make anything, that you can sell $20 lattes and cryptocurrency. Here's a new shit. We can just sell. It's an economy built entirely in the service industry. They don't respect or value manufacturing, or because look, for example, at you can look it up on Wikipedia. It's not hard to find. You can the steel production by country. China, of course, is the world leader in manufacturing, but you'll see even South Korea, Russia, and Japan, countries that have half or less the total population of the USA, are equal, or in Japan's case, have more steel production than the USA. So it's an illustration that we're just an economy that's all bloat, and there's nothing to it. But what just happened was those people in the Rust Belt, those factory owners, those people who have actually hands-on, they're rich, but they have some hands-on experience with industry and with manufacturing. They just realize this is not going to work. We're on the verge of collapse. So they voted, with their money, they voted for Donald Trump, the contrarian candidate who's promising to reverse that. Whether that was a good bet, we'll have to see. I mean, he's not even in office yet. But I think that's what happens. And meanwhile, you have that upper half, and they're upset because and all this rhetoric from Trump falls. I mean, I see it on social media because I follow some of these people, these very affluent people, mostly liberals, mostly on the coast. I mean, there's a few elsewhere, but it's mostly on the coastlines, and they're very upset. They just can't understand. And all that rhetoric about revitalizing American industry, it just falls on deaf ears. They don't even understand why that's important. Opening factories is not important. Having substance to the economy is not important. They look at the stock market and they say, well, the stock market's doing fine and GDP is doing fine. Why do we need to do anything else? And they don't even. And that's what concerns me, because I would like Democrats to do some soul searching and be a good, an actual left-wing party, because it would be nice if Republicans became a real right-wing party, but just to give people a choice. But on that same note, it'd be nice if Democrats became a left-wing party. But I don't, I look at these people. I mean, a lot of people are crying about Trump winning. He's literally worse than Hitler. He's literally this. He's literally that. But I don't see them doing any kind of reflection on why did we lose the election. So I actually disagree with you, Patrick. I don't think it was a planned sleight of hand. I think those people who supported Kamala Harris were genuine, and they are astonished and upset. And I don't think I think that what happens, they're just extremely overconfident also.
Could I just say something?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I agree with you, Ian, that the United States political situation is defined by two parties, which are more than parties, they're coalitions. And Donald Trump did not win because he's a Republican. He won because the coalition of forces, especially at the level of the working class, made it possible. Now, but I would like to make a distinction, and I think too often people paper over this. The billionaire class is not the same as the ruling class.
Yeah.
Yes.
You know, and I think we have to be, you know, Oprah Winfrey, she's a billionaire. The question is she a part of the ruling class? I define the ruling class based upon their being adjacent to or part of the dominant forces controlling the state. Just because you have money doesn't mean that you're part of governance, you're part of ruling. Kanye West is a billionaire. I could name some other Black people, but no one would ever in their right mind say that any of them, these entertainers or sports figures, are part of the ruling class. Now, if we say one coalition, that is the Donald Trump coalition, which is different than the Republican Party, vastly different, I think, one, then what was the other coalition? And why did the coalition that Trump led eat into the voting strength of the Democratic Party coalition in places that were not supposed to be competitive, such as New Jersey, New York, California, and my own state, Pennsylvania? I think the key factor in the 2024 election was what working people did. And that means working people of all races, ethnicities, religions, and so on. Not perfect unity, not the unity of a high level of ideological consciousness yet. But we first must understand what happened in November. And this was a blow to the state. You know, and I'm like all of you, you know, when Trump nominates people like Marco Rubio and this guy Waltz to be the national security advisor, when he himself makes these wild statements and then kind of walks them back and then makes other wild statements and so on. You have to say that politically, Trump is not as stable as this united working class. Working people are far more grounded and stable politically than Trump is. I would make that claim. So, and then the other thing is, this is why France or Germany cannot compare to the role of the American people, because we are at the center of the greatest empire, the greatest threat to world peace in human history. What the American people do is magnified by the fact of our strategic location at this time in human history. I would even go further. The American working class has benefited from the fact that a major part of it are the African American people who have fought and have changed society, be it the anti-slavery struggle or the struggle of the civil rights or Black freedom movement in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. This is a unique force in American and world history, and they bring their consciousness, their culture, their institutions into the fight of the entire working class. I mean, qualitatively, there are a number of things that not only place the American working people in a specific position in world history in this moment, but the fact that the working class of the United States benefits hugely from the presence of the African American people.
Sorry to interrupt, Tony, but I think when we talked to John Jeter, he was suggesting that the Black American or African American working class functioned as a vanguard. Would you, in the Marxist sense, would you agree with that?
I would agree. It's the most advanced section of the entire working class, while not trying to separate itself either from the overall working class or from the American people. You know, in that sense, I might disagree with Jeter's predisposition towards settler colonialism. I don't see the American people as a settler colonial mass who are, in essence or by nature, counter-revolutionary. I don't think most Black workers see it, or Black people see it that way either.
So, well, it's here's okay. So I'll raise a question, an open question for everybody, whoever wants to take this. But me, of course, I am, because I don't live in the USA, I am less affected by domestic policy. So for me, it's all about foreign policy. What is the U.S.? I mean, not to say domestic policy is important, but I focus more on that than maybe the average person. So there was a popular, like Anthony was saying at the beginning of the show, there is a popular mandate, and Trump can choose to go with that mandate or work against it.
Mm-hmm.
But my point of concern is, and polling data shows this, people were overwhelmingly concerned with domestic issues, with the job market, with immigration, that sort of thing. It's the economy stupid, like that saying goes. So if Trump, now I do think if he did in Iraq, I don't think a 2003 Iraq invasion is possible under the current politics, as people are war exhausted, and people are just not going to accept large numbers of their friends and loved ones going to a foreign land. And I think there's also understanding that most, if not all, of the likely adversaries right now are not Saddam's Iraq. And the casualties are not going to be like in Iraq. It's going to be very, so I just don't think a large-scale conventional war is possible. But Trump can double down on what Biden has done. Other people fight for those Western geopolitical interests. They take the casualties. And it's just the argument, and this is literally the argument of these weapons are being made in the USA. The money stays in the USA, and that's how they sell it. Now, I think that's twisting around the truth a bit, because that could also be said of Afghanistan and Iraq and every other American war in history. But this is the first time I've seen someone trying to split hairs and say it's not money spent because it's staying in the USA. It's like, well, it's still, someone's still paying for it. I mean, just because, Halliburton, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon are American companies, we're still paying them, and we're still borrowing money to pay them. So I've never heard a war justified this way. And also, of course, completely ignoring the humanitarian and moral issues of propping up one side of a conflict and prolonging that conflict, which is true in both Ukraine and in Israel. If Israel didn't have that infinite money glitch and infinite weapons glitch it would be the same thing as Ukraine. They would eventually not be able to support the war and would have to negotiate with Hamas and would have to find an exit ramp. So my question for everybody is, do you see Trump flip-flopping on ending wars and just doubling down? Because I think he could because people are more concerned on the domestic policy. Is it likely, based on what he's said and the likelihood of what he's going to do, that he's going to flip-flop on his foreign policy positions that he stated a year ago and 6 months ago?
Tony, Dr. Monteiro.
I'd like to hear the answer.
Yeah, I think you asked the easy question. Trump can do any number of things. You know, I applaud his appointing Kash Patel to head the FBI and Tulsi Gabbard to head the Department of National Intelligence. In a sense, he sent a message that he is at odds with certain aspects of the U.S. state, what they call the deep state. But my focus, indeed, on Trump and what he will do, I mean, and as Trump will be Trump, he will disappoint everybody at some point, certainly when he talks so much. But my emphasis is the American people. I think we live in a dynamic political moment in the United States. I think most geostrategic commentators default to the easy part of all of this. What did Putin say? What did Xi say? What will Iran do? What will Netanyahu do? Well, they're speaking from afar to begin with. But very seldom do any of them speak about the American working people as a geostrategic force. And when you define their characteristics, now, of course, we're talking about over 200 million people. They do not all think the same. They are not all at the same level. But if you just try to measure in a sociological sense, what is the average, the mean, in terms of their consciousness? Well, we do know that 70% of them say that the political and economic systems have to be changed. Let's start there. In a situation where the American ruling elite have committed themselves to a hegemonic role in the world, and the American people are saying, why are you spending 170 billion or more in Ukraine while our schools, while we don't have health care, yada, yada, yada. Why are you supporting a genocide when you are depriving our children, us, of a decent life? Why do you continue to say that inflation is coming down? Well, it's not rising as quickly as it was 2 years ago. But the normal is this high level of inflation, and it's not rising as quickly as it was, but it's still going up. The American people are asking literally for something that appears to be imperial retreat from hegemony, literally retreat from empire. Well, not completely. I understand that. We're not at the end of the game. We're at the beginning of it. And I am suggesting that we're at a new moment. I would agree with Antonio Gramsci. We're in an interregnum. But the old is dying, and I think the new is on the cusp of being born. And the American people are a decisive force, and we have to give credit where credit is due. A lot of black people don't like white people. A lot of white people, well, not that many these days, don't like black people. The country is less racist. The country is more pro-peace. These are important indicators that we have to take account of if we are to say the road ahead looks like this and this is what we would propose. Those are questions.
Do you see with your view of the American working class, do you see a more overt manifestation of it, something that comes out of this frustration, something more dramatic than a poll, like a general strike or something like that?
Well, I don't know about a general strike yet.
Well, just for example.
Yeah, but
I mean, something that involves more than just expressing an opinion.
yeah, yes. And I think that's the question, Patrick. How will this develop?
Yeah.
But I say we're at a starting point of something unusual in modern American history. The only thing that might compare with it is the 1930s and the Great Depression. I think, however, this moment may exceed that in terms of attacks upon the state itself. And at some point, and I think the movement will emerge from what goes on in local areas. I'm from Philadelphia. I know Philadelphia. I've lived here all my life. I've been an activist and so on in Philadelphia. And what I observe here might be replicated in places like Chicago or Cleveland or St. Louis or other major cities that have been deindustrialized. And I am seeing a population that is prepared to take action, political action that is, against the elites that govern and rule them.
So I'm not that convinced that Trump is going to do the right thing. So if you remember Trump's last 4 years, whenever he attacked Syria, he got huge praise from the establishment press. They praised him, they fawned over him, and I could see something similar happening, with all the fronts that he's going to be faced with. And if he does something aggressive or escalatory, I mean, he's going to get a lot of kudos from the establishment. But that's going to go directly, like we're talking about, that's going to go directly against what the American people want. And that's where I think the rubber is going to meet the road. And we're going to see, are the American people going to allow their perceptions and their interests to be manipulated by the fawning media, telling them how great Trump is for escalating here and attacking here? Are they going to buy it, or are they going to, take to the streets, whatever kind of action to resist, escalation? I'm not that convinced that the American people are going to be, I think they're just easy to placate, and it's easy for the establishment press with all the propaganda offensives to just capture their thoughts and capture their opinions and direct them into the wrong area. But I'm playing devil's advocate, Anthony. So,
And I think what you're saying is so important. I mean, this is the type of discussion that I think needs to be had. Now, there's one very interesting, at least the ironies of this whole Trump phenomenon. When he attacked the Assad government, he was praised by the ruling class, right? The media and so on. But then he goes and appoints Tulsi Gabbard, who went on a peace mission to Syria and met with Assad to be the head of national intelligence. Or like Patrick said, he talks all of this talk about Israel and hell will break loose if you don't let the hostages out by the time I'm inaugurated. But then the next day he posts this Jeffrey Sachs lecture where Jeffrey Sachs is attacking Netanyahu and war with Iran. So, will the real Trump stand up? But in spite of that, he was elected by a coalition of forces who tend to be anti-racist, anti-war, anti-establishment. I don't think that's lost to him. I know that he has a strange media strategy where a lot of what he does is more performative than substantive. He misdirects the mainstream media and sometimes does the opposite. I think his hand is much stronger this time around. But all that having been said, the conditions that we now live under were created by people who decided enough is enough. The ruling class, for at least 70% of them, lacks legitimacy. There is a crisis of legitimacy. There is a crisis of rule. There is a crisis of governance. And the people are more alert than they have been for many, many decades.
Well, I want to, just on one point, you mentioned, this whole talking point, not your talking point, but the anti-Trump talking point that Trump is racist is based on exactly nothing. I mean, for one, he's a New York businessman, right? There is racism in New York, but it's not, Hicksville, Alabama. You have to work. If you're a businessman in New York, you have to work with and get along with everybody. Even if you don't like them, you have to get along with Black people. You have to get along with Jewish people. You have to get along with.
Ian, can I say something?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't dismiss the charge that Donald Trump, if not a racist, has capitulated to racist feelings and ideas to get support among parts of what is his coalition.
Will the real Trump stand up? Right.
Yeah, but
right.
No, yeah. Trump has to show that he's not.
Mm-hmm.
It's on him. And until he does that, he will have to deal with the charge of racism. I don't dismiss that. However, I deal with Trump as a phenomenon that literally defeated the main forces of the ruling class, those closest to and those who control the institutions of the state, be they in the media, be they in the FBI, be they in... Look, Patrick, if you remember that post where he's, of Jeffrey Sachs, at the bottom of it, he said, the CIA has toppled governments all over the world. What makes you think they wouldn't do it here?
Yeah.
I mean, we're not dealing with someone who is unaware of the dangers of this moment, even the dangers to his own life.
Yeah. Trump often, it seems, presents himself like a Rorschach test so that people can really see what they want to see. And that's part of his, political instincts. Ian, you were saying something?
I want to address Christie's last comment. Why would the public hold Trump to a higher standard, expect him to keep campaign promises? I mean, it's completely, and to answer Christie's question, I think, and Billy Bob, I think also said this, I am hopefully optimistic, right? Or optimistically hopeful that he'll keep his campaign promises. Of course, he might not, but there are some very low-hanging fruits that he can do in that honeymoon period, because every president has a honeymoon period that they're really trying to signal whether it's going to be a strong or weak president. So they really try to get the most done in that first 100 days in office. So he's got some great low-hanging fruit. I'm not sure he's smart enough to do it or savvy enough. But the foreign policy, I mean, Ukraine and Israel are very easy, low-hanging fruit. And he has the tools. He does have the tools because one, Ukraine is completely dependent on the USA. He can basically give Russia whatever they want, and no one in the USA is really going to care. I mean, trolls on the internet don't count as people. No one is really going to care that much. I mean, let's be honest. At this advanced point, I mean, if he did that in 2022, if it was Trump who had won the 2020 election, it might be a very different story because of all of that force and all of that support behind using Ukraine against Russia. If it was President Trump, not President Biden, it might be a very different story. But Trump has that advantage of coming in 3 years later when everybody's exhausted and just does not care. Even for the most part, the Ukraine lobby is a shadow of what it was 3 years ago. He's got
the people won't care, but there's a powerful.
It's just a lot of people. I think it's true. A lot of people are tired of it. They want. And it is a
populist move, but it would be. I mean, the ruling class would really nail it.
If he sells it as pivoting to the Pacific, to the Indo-Pacific, to pivoting to China, and let's be honest, in that Trinitarian viewpoint of the world, where there's three superpowers: the USA, Russia, and China. You don't want to put yourself in a situation where you're fighting the other two at the same time. So I'm not saying Trump is going, I don't think he wants or is going to escalate to a war with China. I don't think that. I think it's going to be some economic muscling. But to do that, you really want to mend the fence with Russia if you're going to mess around with China. So I think so that's the first point. And I think even with Israel, I mean, Israel is a lot more nuanced, and I say nuanced carefully because I don't mean there isn't a genocide happening, because there is, but it's nuanced because there's much more hardcore support with Israel. However, Trump is not Bernie Sanders. Not even Joe Biden. He is a Zionist with a Jewish son-in-law. That's not a thing I would trivialize. So he's very much in the Zionist camp. And there is that principle of only Nixon can go to China, especially because I think it's also true both in Israel and internationally. Netanyahu is increasingly becoming a pariah, not just because he has that arrest warrant, just people don't see him as competent. Because remember my initial predictions after October 7th, I was expecting this to go for a couple months and Israel would blow up some stuff, declare victory, get the hostages home, and call it a win. And the Wikipedia would even say it's a win, right? More than a year later, right? That's not competent. So I think Trump could very much just say, hey, look, end the war, make a deal with Hamas, get the hostages home, and then boot Netanyahu. Kick him out of office, impeach him, whatever, right? And then, if Trump did, that's not even being anti-Israel. Trump, because they know Trump is their friend, he's going to continue supporting Israel. He's just like, look, I'm not going to fall on my sword for you. You need to give me something to work with. You need to stop what you're doing. So he could do that. And just think of how humiliating. I mean, I'm not sure. I'm more iffy on the Israel position, but I mean, I think that would destroy the Democratic Party for the next 20. I'm not even exaggerating. If Trump was smart on Israel, he could destroy the Democratic Party for the next 20 years. They would not recover from that. Because just think of how humiliating, because that was their entire foreign policy platform. We're helpless. President Biden is helpless. He can't do anything about the genocide. He can't stop it. And if Trump came in and stopped it, even if he's not cutting relations with Israel, he's just stopping the genocide. Just think of how humiliating that would be for these center-left guys who were telling their leftist and far leftist supporters, actually bullying and harassing and ostracizing the people in their own party. For supporting Gaza.
Or Ian, prevents or opposes a war with Iran. You know, see, he can't square the circle. Russia and Iran, I think in a couple of days, a week or so, are going to sign what looks like a strategic agreement, a strategic alliance. Okay, okay, you don't want to go to war. Trump doesn't want to go to war with China or Russia, but he could be pressured maybe to go to war with Iran. But where does that leave him in terms of Russia? Frankly, where does that leave him? And this is the key again that I go back to. Where does that leave him with the coalition that elected him? There's already signs of tension within it over these visas. You know, Trump, it will not be easy for Trump to govern on domestic or foreign policy questions. But the best that he can do is be politically sophisticated enough to understand that everything must go through not the elites that are closest to him or in his inner circle, the people. I think the people are in a position to make a difference. That's what I keep going back to.
Ian, I know you had to run after an hour. I don't want to rush you off.
No, I got some time. I got a little more.
Okay,
We don't have to leave you in a lurch. But I want to point out just this one. I do want, because I want to bring this up because this comes up a lot. So the thing about Trump escalating tension against Russia and sending weapons to Ukraine and all that. So that is true. However, that was also 4 years ago. And also, let's be honest, I'm not completely sure Trump knew where Ukraine was. I'm sorry, that's my dog barking. Spaz. What I was saying is, I'm not sure Trump knew where Ukraine was on the map. So, someone puts that document on his desk. Hey, we need to send some, there's our partner. Because Ukraine is a partner of the USA. It has been a partner of the USA since 1993. So someone puts that document on his desk. Hey, send weapons to Ukraine as part of our defense obligations, blah, blah, blah. Okay. I don't think it's even fair. I don't mention fairness off this, but it's not fair to put what's happening in Ukraine on Trump's head. I think it's in the hindsight of Afghanistan, because I want to share with you I was in a hospital this was in April of 2021. Biden had just entered office. And I remember reading the news where he was talking about, Russian aggression, all this stuff. I remember how despondent I felt, because it was like, we're really going to go through all this again. It was very, even at that point, it's very obvious what was happening, because they were withdrawing from Afghanistan. They needed a war somewhere, so that war was going to be in Ukraine. I think it was very important to get Trump out of office by any means necessary, because he would be an actual boss. Biden's great. Biden, and I think that's actually, it's not accidental they picked Biden, because he's a vegetable. It's great to anybody who's been in that position. I mean, a boss who doesn't do anything, who can't or won't do anything, which just means you can do whatever you want. That's the best boss to have. I think everybody in Biden's administration loved that. They could just do literally do whatever they wanted. He's a mental vegetable. He's not telling them no.
President Blinken, yeah.
Right. Is basically Blinken and Austin and the others running the show. And I'm sure they loved that. But if it was, now imagine if it was Trump and all that stuff that's happened in the last 4 years. I mean, he wouldn't necessarily, I'm not saying he would say no. I'm not saying that at all. He wouldn't necessarily say no for support to Ukraine, support for regime change in Syria, all this other crap. What I am saying, though, is they would have to explain it to him. They would have to sell him on it. It'd be no different than a boardroom meeting where they would have to convince him. And I don't think these people like being in the position of having to explain their bullshit to someone because, well, one, they're not very smart people. I mean, I don't think Lloyd Austin or Antony Blinken are very smart people. They're only there because of nepotism. That's it. Neither of them deserve their positions. I don't think a single person in the Biden White House deserves the position they're in. And these people do not like explaining their position. So, I mean, just imagine that conversation with Trump. He's like, well, we have to support Ukraine against Russia, blah, blah, blah. He's like, okay, but why? Even I remember this was in the winter of 2021. It was a Tucker Carlson show with, I don't remember, it was Sullivan. I think it was, or a congressman. I forget. I'll be honest, I forget who it was. But he was talking about Russia, and Tucker Carlson just asked the point, well, why do we have to be enemies with Russia? Why don't we be allies? And you see just this guy's head exploding because they don't have an answer. They can't actually explain why. Why do we have to? So that's the main reason they needed to get Trump out of the way and rigged the election. I'll just say, they could not have him in office. So
yeah, apparently you haven't persuaded Dust. Dust is not persuaded, but it's okay. We don't have to convince everybody. I wanted to say a few things just about some real what's that word? Consistent strands that Trump has elaborated on since before 2016. So he's always been very critical of the transatlantic alliance. And his theme has always been make America great again. So it's kind of an American-centric. It's like it's different than the establishment status quo. The establishment status quo wanted a united force with Europe, Japan, South Korea, Australia. And together, united, we're going to have this united front, and we're going to deal with these intransigent forces that are not capitulating, like China and Russia. So Trump was suggesting, and all the people behind him, Bannon and all these guys, they're suggesting a different strategy. It's like, why do we need to be friends with Western Europe? We could be friends with Russia, and we need to because we need to peel Russia off from China. And we need to, China's our biggest threat, our real threat that we need to focus on. So plus, as Russia and China are getting stronger, it became clear that they're not going to be able to conquer these countries. They're not going to be able to defeat these countries. And so what I think I see is a change in strategy, a real big shift in tactics. And I've heard it being called in the mainstream media called Fortress America. So we're moving back to our regional power. We're going to focus on regional hegemony, regional dominance, and we're still going to be antagonistic to Russia and China, but through proxy forces. And I think we're going to start taking a back seat in Russia. I think Western Europe is going to be handed the keys to continuing to bother Russia. Meanwhile, we're going to, I think, refocus regionally. That includes taking over Canada. Sorry, Patrick. Taking over, I don't know. We might see a big push for regime change in Venezuela and Nicaragua and maybe Cuba. But Venezuela is the big prize. I mean, there is so much wealth, oil wealth. Imagine if we had a compliant government that just gave us all the oil like they used to. So I really see a shift, and I think I think it has it's gonna have effects, right? So Western Europe, it's gonna be bad, I think, for Western Europe because we're kind of gonna throw them under the bus a little bit, and they're gonna be struggling. The workers in Western Europe, and that's gonna open up opportunities and possibilities for movement there within the working class because they're not gonna be having this really high standard of living that they've enjoyed for a while. Anyway, Tony, what do you think about? Do you see this shift in basic approach to Imperial? Okay, Ian.
Before we segue to that, I just want to answer this next comment from Chris
you're gonna...
again. I guess if we go down a tangent, this comment will get buried, so I want to address it right away. So does the Donald Trump squeeze and takeover of Greenland and the Panama Canal in between create peaceful relations with Russia, China, and Iran? I would say no, but at the same time, yes. Let me explain. So I would say I wouldn't take Trump's statements on Greenland and Canada and the Panama Canal, I would take that with a grain of salt. I would almost say it's virtue signaling. It's like a Democrat saying, all genders are valid. A Democrat talks about all genders are valid, and a Republican says that countries have fluid sovereignty. Let's say maybe Panama and Canada will identify as American. Maybe.
Well, we've just had regime change. Trudeau is out, so maybe that's the.
What I'm getting at, though, is
Donald Trump on the back of his neck.
What I'm getting at, though, is that it's a shift. So, yes, it does. I would say yes. Actually, I would interpret that as a good thing for Iran and China and Russia, because it signals that at least part of the ruling establishment in the USA recognizes that the era of unilateralism, of Wolfowitz doctrine, of all of that is coming to an end. So they're kind of coming back around to almost like a Monroe doctrine. I don't think they're actually going to conquer Canada. I really don't think I'd be very surprised if that happened. I mean, it would be funny for all those people to flee the USA and settle in Canada just for Canada to become part of the USA. That would be extremely funny to me, but I don't think it's going to happen. But I do think that signals that these certain people recognize, okay, we can't rule the world, so we're going to go back to spheres of influence. Okay, fine, we recognize that Eastern Europe is in Russia's sphere of influence.
Coming to terms with their own limitations.
And we have Oceania, so we're just doubling down. And I think Trump will. So let me bring up as an example. I mean, Biden had this extremely aggressive policy, but at the same time, he was so strung out. The American policy was so overstretched. Yes, they were giving unconditional support to Ukraine, but meanwhile, Russia was doing those exercises in Cuba, and they were, and it was deliberately, it was knowingly provocative, just saying, hey, if you're in our backyard, we can be in your backyard too. I think as a guess, Trump is going to crack down on that. He'll say, we'll get out of your backyard, but you need to stay out of our backyard. It's interesting. I think that's
bad news for the people in Venezuela, Cuba.
But I think that's likely what is going to happen, or they're going to at least try to happen. So that answers.
But
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I think that they are coming to terms with their limitations as a unipolar superpower, and they're realizing that, hey, we're going to have to adapt to this new reality, and this is how they're choosing to do it. Re-implementing the Monroe Doctrine. Tony, we haven't heard you for a long time.
No, I just listened. No, just one thing. We got to get it straight about what the what produced the situation in Ukraine. Was not just a matter of the eastern provinces, the Donbass. It was not just about NATO, whether or not Ukraine had a right to join NATO. The whole thing was the Biden administration and the dominant sections of the ruling class were scheming for regime change in Russia. That's what made it existential.
Balkanization of Russia, yeah.
And then balkanization, but definitely regime change. It was not like some Russian submarines in Cuba. They're not there to incite regime change in the United States. And that's what it was, and that's why it is existential. And it's the same thing with Iran. So that's all I wanted to say. I don't want to talk too much, but I mean, we got to get these, in some ways it's a puzzle, and we got to get it straight. What is going on? Putin is not wanting to expand into Western Europe or Poland. He wants to protect the state, the Russian state. And he has to defend it against the Biden administration and those in the U.S. who wanted regime change. And Trump, to his credit, and there's a lot of things you got to mark off where you got to give the guy credit. A couple of days ago in a press conference, he said, in effect, that this was a war provoked by the Biden administration against Russia to overturn the government of Russia. Trump wants at least relationships of peaceful coexistence. We can fight, we can disagree, different economic policies, but let's not go to war. His position with respect to China is not the Biden policy. It's radically different, I think. Although, commentators will say, well, look, Biden kept in the Trump sanctions or the Trump tariffs against China. But Biden wanted more than that. Trump does not. Trump invited Xi Jinping to his inauguration. A gesture, but a gesture that looks like a form or building a form of peaceful coexistence. We don't know what Trump will do or what all of the pressures upon him are politically. We do know that he is aware that the knives are out and that there are forces in the state who wish to assassinate him. That cannot be taken out of the equation.
Yeah.
Sometimes when I look at his performances, I'm saying to myself, oh, that's being done to distract the deep state. For example, they cannot be happy with Kash Patel being the head of the FBI. They cannot ever in this world be happy with Tulsi Gabbard being the head of national intelligence. In my mind, just from a political stand, some of what he does, I feel I can work around. Oh, that doesn't really count for that much. Tulsi Gabbard, Kash Patel, now you're serious. This could get you assassinated. In fact, it's believed that it got John F. Kennedy assassinated when he messed with the CIA. So what prevents a lot of things? We're back again to the American people. Let us say they assassinate Trump or another attempted assassination. The ruling elite have to factor and calculate into the equation. How will the American people respond to this? Another attempted assassination of Trump will be looked at in ways very different from the ways the American people looked at the assassination of John F. Kennedy or even Martin Luther King Jr. The American working people in particular have their eyes not completely wide open, but they're looking at the state and the deep state and its machinations. Any attempt after 2 impeachments, after 2 assassination attempts, after all of this, and then they elect Trump and give him a popular vote mandate too, they are aware of the deep state in ways that I don't think the American working people have ever been. This is a political factor that has to be calculated into any move the ruling class makes. That's my thesis. I don't know that I'm making myself clear enough.
I get it. Do you think?
I'm sorry, Billy.
You don't think the American people are going to buy the fact that it was Iran that assassinated Trump? They're not.
No, I don't think so. I don't believe so. Trump doesn't believe that even. I mean, that's why at the bottom of that post, he said the CIA has overthrown government. What makes you think they won't do it here? He knows where things are coming from. He knows the deep state.
So you're
especially as it relates to
the
life
American
and death
people
for him.
are constrained. the American people are a constraining force on the, establishment because they have to take into consideration, what their response will be. I mean, that's to restate the thesis that you just shared.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. And that goes for domestic political conflict and struggle as well as global peace. We're looking at a different political environment, a different landscape. It is more like political warfare than, oh, we voted, we elected a president, now let's go back and be distracted by the Super Bowl or, whatever. I don't think that's, well, and I'm not talking about the American working class is over 200 million people. That's a huge number. But I'm talking about a critical mass, and by critical mass, I'm talking about the most conscious, the most active, the most prepared to act in behalf of working people and themselves. I would estimate that at least 15% of the American working class, and this is when I say the American working class, it can be middle class people, even people from the upper strata of society, but who identify with the interest of working people for peace, democracy, progress, a better economy, be it, whatever. I am saying that close to 50 million Americans can be counted on that side. That is out of a working class, again, of 200 million. But what is that? That's, that's significant. We have never seen this before. Now, my thesis is also a critique of what goes for the left in this country. I think they've been distracted by a lot of side issues and irrelevant issues that are irrelevant to the American, what I call the American revolutionary process. In fact, I don't think the American left even knows what a revolution would look like in this country. I think I have an idea, but I don't think they know the American people and don't care that much about them and have already factored them out of the political equation. And that's why they can only talk about Trump, what Trump said, what Trump will do. Well, that's an interesting study. But the difficult, the hard lifting, the heavy lifting is what are the American working people thinking? I'm from Philadelphia, as I've said. I think I know Black Philadelphia, and which is the decisive political force in this city. I know something about them in Chicago. And when you see the parallels, it's uncanny. They're thinking almost the same way. And then I throw in Butler, Pennsylvania, because it's in Pennsylvania. I know something about it from its days as an industrial city to what it is today, a city where over the last 50 years, the only major public works that was built in that city was a monument to its citizens who had died from fentanyl and other drug overdoses and suicides. I mean, this is the landscape that the American working people live in. It is not this privileged settler, colonial, reactionary group. It is not that at all. And in this regard, Billy, I am deeply influenced by the approach of Martin Luther King Jr. and the Black Civil Rights Movement, which is the Black Freedom Movement. I didn't know Martin Luther King, but I knew other people, James Lawson, Diane Nash, others who were in the leadership and a part of all of that. Their worldview, their approach to the American people, who were more racist then than they are today. And how could Martin Luther King and them keep alive the idea that this people could be transformed, that a new democracy could come to the United States. And King and those defined what we call the civil rights movement as the Black freedom movement, and the struggle was for a revolutionary transformation of the country. I mean, that's where I am coming from. I know a lot of people would say that the Russian Revolution can be used as a paradigm. I don't agree with that at all. No kind of way. I think it is looking away from the places that you should be looking at. The American people have their own history. The high points in my mind of the American people are first the first American Revolution, but more than that, the Second American Revolution that freed 4 million chattel slaves, freed more people in the 1860s than any revolution in Europe had freed up until the Russian Revolution. And then you put on top of that the Third American Revolution, the Black freedom movement. I think we have to have an understanding of the chronology of our own people, of our own nation. We have to know.
And keep in mind too that Haiti was a successful revolution.
I would agree with
Black
you.
Revolution.
I
agree with so much of what you say. I totally believe that had not the counter-revolution succeeded in murdering so many leaders, that not only Martin Luther King, but Fred Hampton and other Black leaders would have resolved whatever differences they had and come towards a revolutionary leadership, which hopefully would have attracted the white population who would have accepted the leadership and the vanguard position that they were in. And the Black Panthers had so many programs that were focused on the people. They're not as they were portrayed in propaganda as these guys marching around with rifles, as much as they were community oriented and very persuasive within their communities. Anyway, but I mostly in agreement with what you said there.
Yes, but Patrick, Americans and white Americans in particular have been changed in ways that they don't even realize by Martin Luther King and the Civil Rights Movement. The country is not as it was in the 1950s.
No, that's true.
And I agree with you. The assassinations of the 1960s were part of a counter-revolution. But then the ruling elite achieved ideological dominance and hegemony, where many people either trivialize or don't like Martin Luther King and don't know Martin Luther King in any way but the narrative of the ruling class. And then I think the inundation of the youth with a form of, quote, pop culture that is really anti-young people and anti-people. I mean, all of this plays a role. I think we're at the end of that period. I think people are more awake. Now, is it enough? That's the big question. Is it enough? Are the mechanisms that exist among the people, be they unions, churches, parties, movements, or what, are they strong enough to mount the type of offensive that will radically transform the American nation and so on?
Yeah.
Let's
hope so, Tony. Let's hope so.
Yes. Yes.
And let's not count on Trump to do all of our heavy lifting.
No.
We wanna,
yes. I'm sorry. Forgive me.
we want to be optimistic, but yeah, no. We've got to find ways to unite and overcome all these obstacles that keep us from doing that. And it's, race, culture, ideology, religion. I mean, it's a lot of obstacles, and they're very good at manipulating these differences and exploiting them and keeping us divided. And that is the struggle. That's the singular struggle that we have to deal with. So I really appreciate this discussion. We're an hour and a half in. I think it might be a good time to close since my blood sugar is probably in negative territory.
Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you, Ian, Patrick, and Billy. I really appreciate the discussion. And you allowed me to air with
you're a great person to have it with.
Okay.
Yes.
And we hope you will come back to join us very soon. It's going to be a very, very interesting 4 years, but the very first part of this 4 years with Trump is going to be the most interesting.
I agree with you.
It's going to be a roller coaster ride. Thank you, everyone. We will see you next time, probably Tuesday.
Thank you, Billy.
Thank you very much, Billy.
Okay, no problem. See you then.
Okay.